Lauren Boebert leaned forward, lips curling, voice raised just enough to claim the moment. Maybe if you spent more time serving your district than playing celebrity, you'd understand how Congress works, she said, with a smirk that rippled through the committee room. The insult hung there heavy, electric, designed for headlines. There was a flicker, a tightening of the jaw, not from Boebert but from Jasmine Crockett. Crockett didn't flinch, she didn't look away, she stood, slowly, calmly. A hush spread through the chamber as though even the air held its breath. Her posture, her silence was a message before she said a word. She looked directly at Boebert, eyes steady, unshaken. It was a look that said, "Respect is not yours to give or take." Boebert blinked just for a second, a tremor of uncertainty. Had she misjudged the moment? Crockett began to speak not with volume or fury, but with control. Her voice carried across the room, measured and precise. "Congresswoman," she began, "I don't have to play anything to serve the people who sent me here." Someone shifted in their seat. Others leaned in. What was forming wasn't a clapback. It was composure made visible. A lesson in how dignity fights back not with noise, but with truth sharpened by restraint. Boebert tried again, interrupting, "Oh, please, spare us the lecture." But it was too late. The energy had shifted. Crockett didn't need to raise her voice. She stood as if her ancestors were watching, as if every time she'd been dismissed, every time she was told to calm down, had prepared her for this exact second. "That," Crockett said, "is exactly what I intend to do." The murmurs returned, but they were different now. Something was unraveling. Confidence was suddenly on the other side of the aisle. And just when it seemed that Crockett might step back, she leaned forward, locking eyes again. In that moment, she wasn't just responding to an insult. She was embodying every person who'd ever been underestimated who learned to turn humiliation into power. No one in that room was prepared for what came next. This wasn't just another hearing. It was an election-year spectacle disguised as official business. The walls of the committee room weren't just paneled in oak, they were lined with cameras, microphones, and political agendas waiting to explode. Lauren Boebert, the self-styled political disruptor, knew exactly what she was doing. Her team had prepped her. She wasn't there to question policy, she was there to provoke, to bait a reaction. And she'd selected her target with precision. Jasmine Crockett, a freshman Democrat from Texas, outspoken, sharp, and unafraid to speak truth in a room built for performance. Boebert saw that as a threat. Because in today's Congress, truth doesn't just get debated, it gets packaged, clipped, memed. It trends. Reputation becomes currency. Every moment can be turned into a political weapon, and the goal is simple: control the narrative by any means necessary, to make your opponent flinch, to humiliate, to turn them into a headline. And Jasmine Crockett knew it. She arrived that day with a folder of documents, a prepared statement, and the weight of a country watching, especially those who see themselves in her. Black women in America aren't given grace in public spaces. They aren't allowed anger or mistakes or missteps. Every word they utter, every breath they take is judged twice, once as a representative and again as a symbol. So when Boebert leaned back with that practiced sneer and threw her insult across the aisle, the risk wasn't just political. It was cultural. The message beneath the words was clear: you don't belong here. But Crockett did. She wasn't just a rep from Texas. She was an attorney who'd fought for people who couldn't afford representation. A woman who built her career from the ground up without big donors and family names to carry her. And she carried that weight with her into the room, not as baggage, but as armor. For Boebert, this was a performance, a moment to win headlines on right-wing outlets, to rally her base. For Crockett, it was something bigger. This was the moment every underestimated, overqualified woman knows. The instant someone tries to publicly strip away your dignity, assuming you'll fall silent. But she didn't. What's more, everyone knew this hearing had stakes beyond the subjects being discussed. Policy details faded into background noise when the cameras flashed and the comments began scrolling in real time. This wasn't about the bill. It was about dominance, clout, whose voice would echo across social media clips and cable news where 5 seconds of footage can reshape careers. Crockett stood under the weight of history and modern spectacle. And while Boebert rolled her words like grenades, Crockett crafted her silence like stone. She knew that the next words she spoke would not just answer an insult. They would define her not just in that moment, but in the minds of millions of people across the country. Respect, power, identity, each one hung in the air like fragile glass, and if Crockett chose wrong, one sharp blow could shatter them all. But that wasn't how Jasmine Crockett does things. And yet no one expected the tables to turn so quickly. To understand what happened in that room and why it resonated, it helps to step into the world of Lauren Boebert. She didn't just stumble into politics, she branded herself into it. Before she was known as Congresswoman Boebert, she was the owner of Shooter's Grill, a gun-themed restaurant in rural Colorado where servers openly carried firearms. She leaned into the identity, defiant, anti-establishment, loud on purpose. And for many, that persona was refreshing. A woman with the grit of the heartland, no filters, no softness, no apologies. She rode that image into national politics, flipping a district in 2020 with the promise of taking on the elites. Within months, she was a household name not for legislative impact, but for her posture, her presence, her flair for controversy. This was her political currency. She spoke boldly at rallies, tweeted provocatively, got into confrontations that made headlines. She wasn't asking to be liked. She was demanding to be noticed. In the media ecosystem of contemporary politics, that alone is power. Her brand is built on confrontation. If the political stage were a wrestling ring, she'd be the one jumping off the ropes. Her speeches rank among the most openly combative in Congress, often laced with sarcasm, fiery language, and viral-ready one-liners aimed at Democrats, immigrants, and what she calls the radical left. To her base, she's a fighter. To others, she's a provocateur, but no one ignores her, and that visibility is the point. Although her entry into Congress was fueled by grassroots energy, it quickly became clear that her strategy wasn't to legislate quietly. It was to perform loudly. Wherever she went, media followed. Headlines buzzed, clips circulated. This was politics as entertainment, and she was perfectly cast. But there's a deeper strategy at play. Her confrontational style doesn't just energize supporters. It unsettles opponents. It's hard to stay composed when someone throws a verbal grenade in front of cameras, and that's exactly the pressure cooker in which Lauren Boebert thrives. Attack, dismiss, repeat. What she brought into that public hearing wasn't just a question, it was a calculation. She knew Jasmine Crockett wasn't just a colleague. She was a rising figure from a different background, a different story. And stories matter, especially in political media where the battle isn't just for votes, it's for influence, identity, and dominance. So when Boebert leaned into her mic that day, it wasn't out of spontaneity. It was brand consistency. Another hit, another clip, another moment to reinforce her persona as the woman unafraid to play rough even at the expense of decorum. But strength and spectacle aren't the same. Compare that to how Crockett arrived in Congress, not with showmanship but with grounded purpose. Her background is built on legal advocacy, on listening, on representing communities whose voices are drowned out by bluster. Her leadership isn't loud, it's resilient. This is where the contrast becomes stark. Crockett represents a model of public service anchored in empathy. Boebert, one anchored in confrontation. Neither approach is accidental. Both are reflections of the America that sent them. One sees leadership as a platform for inclusion. The other sees it as an arena to conquer. So when the two met that day, their collision was about more than the issues on the table. It was a collision of political styles, a test of what leadership looks like in an age of screens and sound bites. Boebert's brand is built on being unfiltered, even under fire. She knows every moment can be commodified. Every jab can earn applause. For her, stepping into conflict is instinct. But for all her energy, for all her mic grabs and headline-grabbing quotes, something subtle changed when she faced Crockett that afternoon. She expected the usual rhythm: jab, retreat, watch the other crumble. Instead, she found someone who didn't flinch, someone who refused to trade dignity for a viral moment, someone whose quiet confidence made every insult look smaller, not sharper. Boebert's brand thrives on spectacle. Crockett's rises on substance. And in that room on that day, the contrast became undeniable. Because while Lauren Boebert arrived prepared to dominate, she never expected someone else's presence to overshadow her. She never planned for silence to speak louder than her megaphone. She never saw what was coming next. Before Jasmine Crockett ever stepped into Congress, she stood in courtrooms, in community meetings, in front of families who didn't have the money, the visibility, or the privilege to defend themselves. That's where her voice was forged, not in the glow of TV lights, but in the fire of necessity. Her story begins in Dallas, Texas not the gleaming skyscrapers or wealthy suburbs, but in landscapes where the tension between survival and purpose shapes who you become. Her parents weren't politicians or power brokers. No one handed her a microphone. She had to carve out her own path, and that meant working harder, rising earlier, and pushing past the noise of people telling her she wasn't supposed to make it. Jasmine built her career as a defense attorney, and not the kind that chose high-profile clients for fame or money. She stood beside people who were written off, accused, abandoned. She became known in her community as the one who didn't blink when the odds were stacked high. She won cases others wouldn't take. She argued against systems others feared. Her voice became her weapon and her shield. Those battles trained her for the moments when the room starts to close in, when the eyes watching are ready to judge, when powerful people try to tilt the floor beneath you. You learn to breathe, to steady your hands, to speak with calm that masks the storm inside. That grit earned her respect but not always visibility, because transparency doesn't trend. Quiet advocacy doesn't spark outrage clicks. That kind of work is slow, unglamorous, essential. And yet, for Jasmine Crockett, it forged something deeper than fame. It built conviction. That conviction led her into activism, into street protests where grassroots voices demanded to be heard, into conversations with mothers who'd lost children to injustice, into spaces where dignity wasn't just a debate topic, it was a lifeline. She didn't have to wonder what it meant to fight for your seat at the table. She fought for it her whole life. So when her district called on her to run for office, it wasn't because she was the loudest. It was because she was the most trusted. She hadn't built a brand, she'd built a relationship. Her campaign wasn't fueled by rage or spectacle. It was driven by people who'd seen her stand when others stepped back. Florida teens, single parents, aging activists, all of them believed Jasmine had something rare, the kind of leadership that doesn't buckle under pressure. That calm under fire didn't disappear when she stepped into Washington. If anything, it became more essential. In rooms full of polished egos, she remained grounded. In hearings where others threw shade or shouted slogans, she stayed with the facts. She wasn't there to win sound bites. She was there to represent. So when that critical moment arrived in the hearing, the one where Boebert lobbed her insult across the aisle, expecting Crockett to erupt, Jasmine felt something familiar. It wasn't shock or anger. It was clarity. She'd been here before. Different room, same dynamic. Someone in power trying to undercut her dignity. She stood up, not out of pride or defiance, but from the deep recognition that silence in the face of insult doesn't protect you. It erases you. As she rose that day, every step felt like history walking with her. Every woman who'd been talked over, every activist dismissed for being too emotional, every immigrant called other, every community that had demanded dignity and been told to wait. Her voice was soft, steady, controlled, not because she lacked fire, but because she knew exactly when to let it show. When she spoke, she didn't drag Boebert's character or mock her behavior. She didn't shout. She didn't point fingers. She told the truth. A truth crafted by years of training in environments where truth was the only thing that could beat power. And that's why her response landed the way it did. Because it wasn't just a clapback. It wasn't a viral-worthy moment of sass or shade. It was the culmination of a lifetime of preparation. Every second that passed in that hearing became a testament to something far bigger than the moment itself. It became a signal to everyone watching, everyone tired of seeing bullies rewarded for being louder, that there is another kind of power. A quieter, deeper kind. A power that comes from walking through fire without letting it burn you down. By the time Jasmine Crockett sat back down, the room felt different. Not because Boebert had shipped off defeat, but because Crockett had turned her restraint into victory. She didn't need applause, she didn't need to trend, but trend she did. Because the story wasn't just about what she said, it was about who she had become in the process. A woman who walks into a room knowing the weight of every voice who doesn't get an audience, and using her own to make sure they're represented. This wasn't just a clapback, it was years of purpose in one moment. The hearing was already tense, but when Boebert narrowed her eyes and leaned into the microphone again, the room felt like it shifted 2 degrees warmer. You could feel every back straighten. Staffers paused mid-note. It was the moment everyone knew was coming. The clash had only started. "Maybe you didn't understand the question," Boebert said, her voice tipped with sarcasm. She lifted her pen slightly like a teacher scolding a student. "I can repeat it, slowly, if that helps." The chuckle she forced from a few allies echoed louder than it should have. Crockett didn't blink. Congresswoman, she replied, measured, precise. I understood you perfectly. But I'd appreciate clarity. Are you questioning the issue, or are you questioning me? A shift in tone, a tug at the fabric of power. Crockett wasn't just responding. She was reframing the conversation, and the tension snapped like an invisible thread. Boebert smirked, trying to regain her footing. You know, it's adorable when new members of Congress get sensitive, makes glancing through your resume feel like community theater. Ouch, even some of the staffers winced. Crockett inhaled, calm, grounded, choosing her words like stones she was setting in place, not throwing. I'm sensitive to the people I represent, she said. They sent me here to handle facts, not personal insults. She paused. Can we get back to those? Suddenly, the room wasn't just watching, they were choosing sides. Was this just another spirited hearing, or something more? An all-out test of who gets to define legitimacy? Boebert's eyes flashed. The cameras shifted to her with anticipation. She had to regain the upper hand. This was her arena, and she wasn't about to let it slip. Oh, I know you want to be taken seriously, she said, leaning back with feigned pity. But perhaps Congress isn't the place for self-righteous monologues. We deal in policy here, not poetry. A soft murmur rippled across the audience. Some nodded, some bristled. Each word became another line drawn in the sand. Crockett kept her gaze steady. Her voice remained soft, but her question cut through the noise. Are we here to question motives or results? That landed, even across partisan lines, heads tilted. It wasn't just a comeback, it was a reframing. Suddenly, the person wielding sarcasm looked petty. The person staying focused looked powerful. Even in silence, the battleground was visible. The committee room became a space where power dynamics flipped in real time. One woman throwing shade, the other reflecting light, and the room felt it. Then came the moment that unsettled even Boebert. Congresswoman, Crockett said quietly, leaning into her mic, I've been in courtrooms where someone tried to distract from the facts using tone. It never works. That was the first time Boebert didn't have a prepared line. She huffed, flipped through papers, tried to regain composure, but that line lingered. Because the truth behind it was simple, Crockett wasn't just choosing her words, she was choosing her ground. This wasn't a fight for buzzwords, it was a fight over who cares enough to rise above them. Suddenly, what had been a battle of quips wasn't a battle at all. It was a lesson, a demonstration, a kind of journalism in slow motion where the frames caught every raised brow and tightened jaw. Who would the room side with? The performative aggressor with the camera-ready phrases, or the quiet counterweight, pulling back the curtain on what this moment really meant. Everything hung on what would happen next. Would Crockett stay composed? Would Boebert escalate further? The country was watching, the cameras were rolling. But this wasn't just about tone, it was about the truth. The committee room was suspended in a kind of electric quiet, one of those moments where everyone knows something important is about to happen but can't predict how. Lauren Boebert shifted in her chair, flipping through her papers as though resituating herself in control. But that illusion was already dissolving. The camera lens framed her in unflattering close-up, eyes narrowed, mouth set in a thin line. Jasmine Crockett hadn't raised her voice. She hadn't matched fire with fire. It was worse than that for Boebert. She refused to play the game, and now she was preparing to make her move. She leaned forward, small motion, enormous weight, a calculated lean. She placed both hands on the desk shoulder-width apart and waited half a breath. A performer would have launched into a speech, but Jasmine Crockett let silence do the opening work. Congresswoman, she began, her tone level and calm, I don't need to trade insults with you. No mockery, no venom, just plain-spoken truth. That's why it landed. The first ripple of tension broke across the room. Someone exhaled loudly. A pen dropped onto paper somewhere. Even the dull murmur of sideline conversations haltingly died. Crockett continued, looking directly at Boebert, not glaring, not judging, just seeing her, fully, and Boebert wasn't ready for that. I came here to talk about policy, Crockett said, about people's lives, not personalities. A subtle emphasis, people's lives. It was a refocus, a tether back to purpose. You could feel the room start to shift. Even those drifting between their phones and their notes were suddenly, helplessly drawn back to her. But if you want to turn this into a spectacle, she said, I'll oblige. Not because I enjoy it, but because someone needs to remind this room who we're really accountable to. Pause, she let those words hang. Accountable to. It wasn't just a clapback, it was a recalibration. The moment when a committee hearing became a morality play and Crockett assumed the narrator role. Boebert's smirk faltered. A flicker, it was small, but it was real. She wasn't expecting this. She expected shouting, a reactive display. She expected Crockett to lean into the stereotype she'd prepped against. Instead, she was getting a dose of political aikido, calm resistance turning aggression against itself. Crockett straightened her spine not stiffly, but naturally like someone stepping into their full height, fully aware that history was paying attention. You questioned whether I belong here, she said, unflinching. Let me answer that for you. I belong here because the people I serve sent me here, and I don't take that lightly. The first hint of applause quickly silenced. A few nervous laughs sliced through the air. Boebert quickly tapped her mic, clearly unsettled, forcing a chuckle like she was pretending to be unbothered. But it was too late. The narrative had shifted. Crockett went on. See, I've walked into rooms like this my whole life, rooms where I had to prove I was worthy of being heard. Rooms where people tried to shame me into silence. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. She let the weight of what she was saying reach every corner. That's what made the next line land with the force of a hammer. But I didn't come here to be quiet. Boom. A low gasp, the kind you hear when someone says what everyone else was too scared to think. And I won't apologize for that. Pause just for a beat. Cameras caught at every flicker of expression. Because people are depending on me, she continued, and on all of us, to cut through these theatrics and get to the truth. Truth, it wasn't just a word here. It was a blade, a boundary she drew between performance politics and real service. Boebert tried to interject, if you're done with the speech. But Crockett did something unexpected. She smiled. A small, knowing smile. A smile that said, I see this game. I just no longer care to play by your rules. No, Congresswoman, Crockett said smoothly. I'm not making a speech. I'm explaining why your tactics don't work here, not anymore. That was the pivot, the mic drop without even needing to drop a mic. A shift so subtle and yet so seismic that you could feel the balance of control tilt, cell by cell, pixel by pixel. Just then flash, a photographer captured the moment. Crockett poised in calm clarity, Boebert visibly flustered. That image would be everywhere by nightfall. This chamber may be used to loud voices, Crockett continued. But sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is stay standing while others try to shout you down. It wasn't accusation, it wasn't even anger, it was a declaration, a promise, a redefinition of strength. Even committee members who often sparred with Crockett looked her way, some with respect, others with surprise, progressives watching thoughtful, moderates curious. Even a few Republicans quietly reconsidered their talking points. Because everyone could feel it. This wasn't just another exchange. It wasn't just two politicians arguing. This was the moment where one person chose dignity over performance and dignity won. Crockett finished with a simple closing. And let me be clear, I didn't come here to be liked. I came here to represent. And I will not be distracted from that because someone thought an insult could get them trending. Silence. Not awkward, reverent. Then like a tidal wave, murmurs swept the room. The chair cleared their throat. A few phones lit up quietly, thumbs racing. Even Boebert sat still, hands locked around her pen, suddenly small in the frame. It wasn't that Crockett had roasted her. She had exposed her, unmasked her tactics, revealed the smallness behind the spectacle. This hearing, Crockett concluded, lifting her eyes across the room, isn't about us. It's about accountability. It's about responsibility. It's about the people who aren't in the room. Let's remember that. And just like that, she sat. Cameras zoomed on her. The comments would write themselves. The hashtags would emerge. The clips would replay. But at that moment in that room, no one needed a replay. The villain had been unmasked, not with insults or shouting, but with composure. Crockett didn't just hold her ground, she changed it. She stood up against power without losing grace. For everyone watching, this was the moment of truth. Because she didn't just respond, she led. And she made it look effortless. But the shockwaves were only beginning. The moment the hearing adjourned, it was already too late. The clip had escaped the room fast, clean, and devastating. Before the gavel even hit, phones buzzed, screens lit up. A notification avalanche was forming. The first viral tweet arrived less than 3 minutes after Crockett sat down. Jasmine Crockett just REARRANGED Lauren Boebert's whole personality without raising her voice. This is what grace under fire looks like. Crockett clapback. Within 10 minutes, the hashtag hit number 6 on trending. By lunch, it was number 1. Twitter, now a battlefield of rapid reactions and political theater, was alight with GIFs, memes, and short clips. Someone stitched the moment Crockett said, "I didn't come here to be quiet," into a slow-motion montage set to a Beyoncé track. Another layered it with a scene from Black Panther. Show them who you are. The comment section split into rows of admiration and panic. At Truth Hurts collision, she didn't raise her voice, she raised the standard. At Policy Nerd 88, this is what it looks like when someone knows their WHY, period. At Conlaw Bro, Boeb failed the vibe check, Crockett passed the bar. One creator on TikTok titled their reaction, "How Black Women End Generational Disrespect in Under 30 Seconds." Within hours, it had 2.1 million views. Another stitched in footage from courtroom dramas with the line, "Permission to speak truth to power? Granted." Then came the mashups. Crockett's calm stare superimposed onto Michael Jordan shrugging. Boebert wiped from her mic as text popped up, "When your clapback gets clapped back." Even late-night hosts couldn't resist. Trevor-style desk monologues, unfiltered podcaster takes, and political roundtables all replaying the moment and praising the precision of Crockett's composure. You ever see someone tear someone apart so calmly, you start questioning your whole life strategy, one quipped. But commentary on Crockett's tone quickly became commentary on power, on representation, on the emotional labor of being calm under constant provocation. For many women watching, particularly Black women, the moment was bigger than politics. It was personal. Twitter threads flooded with testimonials. "I've been Jasmine in meetings, in classrooms. I felt that silence before she spoke. She didn't just drag her, she shifted the room, that's the difference." Even celebrities chimed in. Kerry Washington quote-tweeted a clip with a simple, clapping medium. LeBron dropped a fire emoji thread. And Ava DuVernay posted the video with 3 words, "She did that." But not everyone celebrated. Certain corners of the internet scrambled to reframe the narrative. Claims that Crockett was performing or race-baiting cropped up. Cable commentators asked whether she was too emotional or too pointed. But those attempts drowned under the surge of support. Because the facts weren't in dispute, Crockett had held her ground. Boebert had swung and missed. Even journalists known for keeping distance wrote op-eds about the quiet mastery of that moment and the cultural weight of Crockett's restraint. The clip looped endlessly. Reaction channels built 20-minute breakdowns. Playlist titles appeared. Legendary congressional mic drops. By the end of the night, Crockett's follower count had jumped 12,000. Boebert trended too, but not the way her advisors had hoped. One meme summed it up perfectly. 2 side-by-side photos, one labeled loud, the other louder. Underneath, one makes noise, the other makes history. And yet for all the shockwaves online, and the cheering digital crowds, none of it compared to what happened behind closed doors. Because while people were busy memeing, retweeting, and reacting, something far deeper and more consequential was forming in the halls of Congress. But the real shock came in the days that followed. The clips had gone viral, the reaction videos had flooded YouTube, and the tweets kept scrolling for days, but Jasmine Crockett didn't tweet a victory lap. She didn't go on television to gloat or shade her colleague. Instead, she appeared briefly on camera, standing outside the Capitol steps, dressed in a simple black blazer, her demeanor unchanged from that hearing room. "This wasn't about me proving anything," she said. "It was about standing in the truth. If I did that, then I did my job." And just like that, the moment reframed itself. Because while thousands celebrated her composure, turned it into hashtags, and highlight reels, Crockett reminded everyone what it had always been about: dignity. She explained to a reporter later that her goal wasn't to win a viral moment, but to demonstrate stillness when provocation buzzes around you. "I carry more than my own story in that room," she said. "I represent communities that have been talked over, misrepresented, silenced. So when someone tries to pull me into a performance, I don't let them. I choose purpose." The calm after the storm wasn't silence. It was clarity, and in that calm, something became overwhelmingly apparent. Crockett hadn't just responded to Boebert, she had reframed congressional confrontation itself. She'd proven that power isn't always loud or flamboyant or threaded with mockery. Power can be poised, purposeful, delivered at room temperature and still set a fire that spreads far beyond the moment. In response to a follow-up question about her mic drop moment, Crockett shook her head. That wasn't a mic drop, she corrected. A mic drop closes a conversation. What I wanted to do was open one, about how we treat each other, about what leadership should look like. The line landed in articles and op-eds across the country. A mic drop closes, I'm here to open. Parents shared it with their kids, teachers shared it in classrooms, advocacy groups printed it on posters. Because Crockett, knowingly or not, had become a symbol in real time. Not of a perfectly crafted takedown, but of the strength behind composure. The audacity of meeting insult with integrity and still winning the room. This wasn't just a clapback, it was a revelation of who has real power and where it comes from. Because the truth wasn't in the words spoken loudly, it was in the words spoken with meaning. And Crockett never once waived her values or her focus or her control, not even when she was targeted. I didn't have to change who I was to handle that, she told an audience at a Houston town hall a week later. There's this pressure sometimes to match the tone of disrespect we're given, but that just makes us lose ourselves. I didn't react, I responded. The room applauded not loudly but deeply. It was that kind of moment. People weren't celebrating the destruction of an opponent. They were celebrating the preservation of someone's character under pressure. By then, the internet had moved on to other things. But those who watched closely, those who really understood the moment, knew something had shifted in the political atmosphere. Not because Crockett embarrassed Boebert, but because she exposed the lie that respect has to be sacrificed to win the moment. In a political environment obsessed with viral aggression, Crockett proved that composure could be just as contagious. She didn't break her voice. She didn't break her values. She set the example, and it quietly, profoundly, rewrote the standard in the room, and far beyond. And she left the rest of us with a question that still echoes. If power is defined by who can shout the loudest, what happens when the person who whispers tells the truth? This wasn't just a response. It was a reminder to everyone paying attention that the real storm was never the clash, it was in the calm that followed. Lauren Boebert thought she could humiliate Jasmine Crockett. But what she didn't see was the power of someone who stands rooted in purpose. Someone who knows their worth, their responsibility, and their voice so deeply that no insult can shake it loose. This wasn't just a viral moment. It was a declaration. Dignity can win even in the loudest room, even when the cameras are rolling, even when someone tries to reduce you to a soundbite. Jasmine Crockett didn't just defend herself. She defended what leadership can look like when it's grounded in truth, service, and the quiet fire of self-respect. She didn't match her opponent's tone, she changed the temperature of the room. And in doing so, she reminded all of us, you don't have to raise your voice to rise in power. So now the story is yours. If you believe that composure under pressure is strength. If you're tired of shouting being mistaken for leadership. If you saw yourself in the calm, steady gaze of Jasmine Crockett that day. Subscribe, share this story. Amplify the voices that carry dignity into the places where it's forgotten. Tell us in the comments, when have you witnessed someone stand firm in the face of disrespect? What moment showed you what real courage looks like? Because change doesn't happen through trending moments alone. It happens when we turn them into movements. This isn't the end of the story. It's a reminder that every time you stand with truth, with purpose, with dignity, you become the message too. So stay with us. More stories like this are coming. Subscribe, share, and keep the story going.